Thank you all for coming. ProPublica is delighted to conduct these panels with the Tenement Museum. I've been coming to this block actually for 50 years. My great-grandmother used to live down the street, and so it always has a particularly special meaning for me. Let me just quickly move to introducing our fabulous panel tonight. I will start on the far side from me. Michael Cooper is national correspondent from the New York Times, former Albany bureau chief, and began his career at the Times as a night copy boy while he was in college. That is to say, he has had one job his whole life. It's particularly impressive in the modern world and rare. Nearest to me, Jared Bernstein joined the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities in May 2011 as a senior fellow. From 2009 till 2011, so most of the period that we'll probably be discussing tonight, he was the chief economist and economic advisor to the Vice President of the United States. Before that, he was at the Economic Policy Institute, and earlier, deputy chief economist at the U.S. Department of Labor. I take it not in the immediately preceding administration, but in the one before that.
Skipped one.
Right. And last, in the middle, my colleague, Michael Grabell, who has written a fabulous book, Money Well Spent, that if you have not already bought and read, I really strongly urge you to. It was summed up, I thought, beautifully, both even-handedly and hard-headedly, in the Sunday Review section of the New York Times yesterday, and we're very, very proud of Michael's work, not only for us, but in this book. He's been a reporter at ProPublica since 2008, earlier was a reporter at the Dallas Morning News, and has twice been a finalist for the Livingston Award as one of the leading young journalists in America. Thank you again for joining us. I also want to just say that we're particularly honored to have in the audience tonight my friend and our friend, the former Lieutenant Governor of the state of New York, Dick Ravitch. So thank you all very much for coming, and away we go.
All right, let's begin. So 3 years ago today, Congress passed the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. It was about this time where the House had already passed the bill around 3:30 p.m., and we were waiting for Senator Jared Brown of Ohio to return from his mother's wake to cast the 60th vote in the Senate. The bill, I think, finally closed around 10:30 p.m. The bill contained about $300 billion in tax cuts, about $200 billion in safety net spending for Medicaid, unemployment, and food stamps, things like that, about $100 billion in education spending to save teachers' jobs and promote education reform, about another $200 billion for infrastructure projects, and this was a combination of the shovel-ready highway and road projects and long-term investments in clean energy, broadband, electronic health records, electric cars, and high-speed rail. Overall, it is now estimated that it'll cost about $840 billion. And if you look at all these big programs over time, like the WPA, the Moon Race, the Louisiana Purchase, the Manhattan Project, and the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe after World War II, the stimulus was bigger than all of these things, adjusted for inflation. And so when this all started, this really felt like the New Deal of the 21st century. There was a lot of anticipation, I think, among reporters and among the public at a time when we were losing 700,000 jobs a month. We had a new president come in, bringing a lot of hope to the country. And we had just seen the bailout for the banks, which had angered a lot of people on principle. And so the stimulus was coming along as sort of this, almost the bailout for the people. This would be something to create jobs and help just ordinary folks make ends meet after they had been hurt by the recession. So there's a great sense of anticipation. We are now 3 years later with most of the money spent. The unemployment rate has been coming down somewhat in recent months to 8.3%. And for most of the last 2 years, we sort of saw it at 9% unemployment. So I'm very pleased to be here with our panelists here to delve more into this issue that's become kind of an obsession in my life. Very rare to be able to say that. So let me start with Jared here to explain, the theory behind the stimulus. What were the goals of the administration and some of the discussions that were going on in the transition team as this was coming together?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me to the event, and thank you, Michael Grabell, two Michaels up here, for writing such a careful and I think important book. I wanted to start out with something that the book doesn't really go very deeply into, not a critique, it's just not so much the topic. The book is very micro. It looks at the many programs of the Recovery Act. But there's macroeconomics behind all this. And we didn't promise there'd be no math on this exam, so I'm going to give you a very, very simple formula that is actually quite elucidating in this context. Output, or GDP, is the sum of consumption. That's about 70% of the economy. Investment, it's probably about 12%. Government spending, and net exports. So our exports minus what we import. I'll say that again because this is kind of at the heart of Keynes's fundamental insight back in the 30s. Consumption, that's the largest part of our economy. Investment, so investment in factories and machines. Government spending, and net exports, which is just exports, the stuff we sell abroad versus what we buy from other countries. When you hit a recession, consumption tends to stumble. And in fact, one of the reasons why this recession has been so difficult, so intractable, and so long is because it's taken so long for consumers to kind of get back into the game. A lot of this had to do with being so indebted. So people may have heard discussions about a deleveraging cycle. That's just an obscure way of saying consumers kind of had to spend down their debt until they were ready to go out and start spending again. When consumers stumble because there's a shock to the economy, and the bursting of the housing bubble and the ensuing Great Recession was very much that shock. You heard Michael's statistics. Investors tend to sit on the sidelines because there's not much happening in terms of economic activity. Put aside the foreign sector for a minute. The only game in town is G. C plus I plus G. C's on the mat, I's on the mat. It's up to G to step in and fill the void. This was very much the pressing economic insight, this Keynesian imperative in Chicago in December of 2008. I think it was December 15th, as I recall, when the economics team got together, the full team got together for the first time with the new president, vice president-elect. Chicago, mid-Chicago, it was a snowy afternoon. I should have worn I went to Chicago and I realized, geez, I forgot to wear a sport coat. I had a suit and I just somehow didn't have a sport coat. So I bought a sport coat on the street of Chicago. I should have worn that in honor of this event. We began with Christy Romer, the president, the chief economist, Council of Economic Advisors, taking this new president through the lay of the land and going over the depth of what we were looking at and beginning to talk about how we were going to need a big-ass Keynesian stimulus. So that's kind of a macroeconomic overview. What I thought would be interesting, and I'll stop now because I think we should mix it up, but what I thought would be interesting as we go along is to perhaps talk about a lot of what I take Michael's, what I found particularly interesting and important and useful in Michael's book is on the implementation. Keynes himself, who one of the most important economists of the 20th century, of course, didn't write much at all about implementation. Michael Grabell has written a lot more about implementation than Keynes did of Keynesian stimulus. In fact, there's a famous letter that Keynes wrote to Roosevelt once where he wrote about a page and a half about what he thought Roosevelt should do. And it kind of says, railroads are really good, and, there's some other, should maybe try to give people some tax cuts and stuff like that. But, really what matters is you just get the money out there. And of course, Keynes famously joked, look, if you can't find anything else to do, pay one group of people to bury the money and another group of people to dig it up. So, you know, funny, good joke, right? But if you're out there trying to implement an $800+ billion stimulus, that doesn't give you much guidance. So I thought as we